Hello there, friendos and friendettes across the internetscape. This is, of course, Omega, and in this Omega Impressions, we're going to be going through Whispering Willows, a soon-to-be-released action-adventure indie game developed and published by DawnLight Interactive LLC, who, to the best of my knowledge, have created no other games aside from Whispering Willows. However, for a first endeavor, it's actually pretty good. So the development house is pretty small. This is, of course, going to be a budget game, so if that says anything about the settings that you're about to see, just know, budget. So the controls are pretty basic. You pretty much only have 4 functions that you're going to be using, so even if it doesn't really matter if you're on a right-hand or left-hand setup, the controls will pretty much function for you no matter what, and you won't really have to worry about that. There's no rebinding, unfortunately, but even then, it's probably not something you're going to be worrying about too much. Audio sliders, separate ones for sound effects and music, pretty nice. They do look a little bit like brightness scales, but we're just going to ignore that. Unfortunately, this is yet another indie game that decides to use the arrow keys and WASD to navigate the menus. I assume this game is also going to be going to consoles, so this is probably just maybe a way of making the port a little bit easier, but the mouse is here, guys. Please use the mouse. Brightness settings, of course, standard. I turned the brightness down fairly low because I was expecting it to get a little bit scarier than it is. The game is actually more of a thriller than it is a horror game. From the initial outset, it kind of seems like it would be a horror game a little bit, but there aren't that many horror elements. There are a few moments in the game that get kind of unnerving, but there's nothing that's like very openly scary about it. There's nothing there are certainly tense moments, but there's nothing that really makes you jump out of your seat. There are no jump scares. There's nothing that makes you break out in a cold sweat. There's nothing that makes you go, nope, 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 like certain games. So you won't really have to worry about the brightness too much, but turn it down anyway because this game actually does a very good job of lighting. Video options, not much. You don't really need much. The graphics options, at least it has a proper resolution scaler. That's nice. But aside from that, you won't really need these options. The game is pretty simplistic. Yes, save those settings. So we're gonna go load into a new game here. Now, I have actually put about 2 hours into this game. I wanted to go a little bit further, but in a moment that I kind of just passed, and I might have to redo it right here, I think I'm going to. Yep. There's a little conversation right here. So, as I was saying, I did want to wait a little bit longer to start recording this Omega Impressions, but I felt like I was getting pretty far in the game, and I probably only had like an hour or 2 left, and I didn't want to randomly come across the ending, because this game's objective is... It's clear what the objective is, but it's very opaque as to how you're supposed to get to that objective. So, how it basically works is you are a little girl named Elena, who is seen right here, and your father is currently working as the caretaker of this mansion that you're currently in, I believe it's called the Warham Mansion. Let's look at the notes. Wortham Mansion, that's right. I always forget the name. And you receive, basically, in the opening cutscene, you receive a vision that your father is probably getting horribly somethinged by ghosts. Probably surprise butt sexed. And you storm out the door against your mother's wishes, and you run down to this local mansion in the hopes of saving your father. Now, you initially find out that this amulet that you have, the one that's around my neck and that you will see will glow very frequently, has the power to turn you into a ghost. What it's basically explained as doing is it separates... You encounter an Indian character early on in the game, or Native American. Native American is probably the better term to class them as. And he explains that he's a shaman, and that this grounds were basically cursed by his people because they were slaughtered by the owner of the mansion, who basically built up the town around the corpses of Indians that he slaughtered to take the land. Yeah, 1800s, it sucked. White men were evil. And the shaman explains that the amulet allows you to separate your spirit self from your physical self, and the spirit self is probably one of the main mechanics for solving the quote-unquote puzzles in the game. Now I say quote-unquote because most of these, again, quote-unquote puzzles aren't really anything beyond you need to go into spirit form and possess an object so that you can move it into a place where you can then move your physical body onto. Or you need to, say, move through a little crack in the ceiling. So, I think I can find an example for this. You have to move through a little crack in the ceiling to reach a lever that'll allow you to open a door on the other side, and that'll allow you to progress through the level. So they're not really complex, not really even puzzles so much. It's pretty much just find the crack in the ceiling and turn into spirit form and go through there. But it's a nice little mechanic nonetheless. I mean, there aren't but pretty much 2 mechanics in this game. You move around and you pick up and interact with stuff and you turn into a ghost, so I guess 3. And speaking of interacting with ghosts, as you had seen before, when you turn into that spirit form, you then have the ability to see and interact with the different ghosts that haunt this mansion, who for some reason all know your name. And in doing so, you can pick up little tidbits about the story that was going on here, and about the characters, and you can learn a little bit about their backstory, and about what went down here that pretty much left the mansion in its state. They will usually leave you little notes that you can read, kind of like little personal diary entries, and that'll basically just give you some more backstory. So, let's move on through this room. Now, as you can see, the lighting is actually pretty impressive. As you move from room to room, the lighting will actually dim in the room that you were just in, but it's still there enough where you can see the room. And until you enter a room, as like right now, it's pretty much pitch black. And you can fiddle around with little things, or you can find notes on the ground. Like, here's another one. Darby O'Halloran was the person that we met at the beginning, down by the elevator. And he'll basically, those notes will basically tell you little bits about the characters. Oh, and when the amulet is glowing, as it is right now, that usually means that there's a ghost entity nearby. Now, you can, of course, go over and mingle with one of these. Fleur la rue. Oh no, I've lost it. It's as though a part of me is missing. Please, little girl, help me find it. Help me find my lost love letter. So, usually these characters will ask you to go do little fetch quests for them, to find pieces of information, letters, objects that were important to them, stuff like that. You know, stuff ghosts would care about. And I should also mention, while this is going on, you also get these diary entries. Now, these diary entries are very important. Usually, you will run across these after completing an objective, which are all obscured. You will never know, really, until you complete an objective that it was there. And in the process of doing so, you get the diary entry, which will then give you a bit of a hint, usually outlined in red, as to what you're supposed to do. For example, we met the character outlined in red there, and she wants us to find a love letter outlined in red. So it'll usually give you some indication of where you have to go, or it'll give you some indication of what you're looking for. Oh, there's a little... I thought the game was screwing with me for a second there. There's actually a little switch on the ground. So this is, again, one of those puzzles. As you can see, not very complex. Basically, just interact with the environment a little bit in a intuitive way, and stuff happens. But I will say, none of these puzzles are really obscure in that they don't follow logic that doesn't, you know, make any sense. They don't follow illogic. When there's a puzzle there, whatever they're having you do makes sense. Like, if... For example, right there, if there's a switch in the ground, it's not unintuitive. You gotta move the chest over into the location. Which is pretty nice. I don't like it when games have very unintuitive puzzles. Now, while I'm also doing this, I should probably explain a little bit about the art direction of the game. The art direction is fantastic in this game. It is actually very reminiscent of Dust and Elysian Tale. If you recall that game, I believe it came out 2012-ish. Was originally released on the Xbox 360, but the art direction is stunning, and the animation on, say, I forgot her name. The girl's hair, Elena's hair. I always forget the name. The art design on Elena's hair when it's flowing around, the animation on that, the blue tint that all the ghosts have, and the fact that the ghosts are basically designed to look how they did when they died, is very nice. Now, the dialogue isn't really anything special, but it is enough to carry you through. And it is usually pretty important that you speak with everything you can speak to, because, like I said before, and that you investigate everything, because the game doesn't have a proper objective screen. In order to really get an idea of what you're supposed to be doing, or where you're supposed to be going, you kind of need to speak with everyone, which will give you little hints, and then you kind of have to put the pieces together to figure out where you're supposed to be going. Which I find nice. It's a game that doesn't hold your hand, but at the same time, I kind of wish it provided just a little bit more guidance, because there have been certain instances where I didn't really know where I was going or what I was doing, and I had to just make kind of blind guesses. I suppose the benefit to that is that every time I made a blind guess, I was right about where I had to go. But I still think for other players that it might not be the case, and they might not get so lucky that they just instantly kind of know, oh, I have to go here. But maybe that's just me, and no one will actually have a problem with that. It could just be the case that I'm kind of underestimating the intelligence of people. I am known to do that sometimes. So, a little bit unintuitive that way, but you might not have an issue with it. You should be able to get through it pretty easily. So what else is there to say about the game? Well, the game does have enemies, but they're not really worth mentioning. I don't know if it's the press release build I got, or if this is just the game itself. If I can find an enemy, I'll show this to you. But the enemies are just... It's like they're not even there. What's a good example of this? There's an earlier section where you have to go through a maze. It's a maze in the middle of the garden, of course. It's kind of that traditional little hedge maze that you have to go through. It's pretty intuitively designed as well. You don't really feel like you're floundering about in the maze, which is a good thing because it is a maze. It could have been terrible to have to go through. I was kind of dreading it. But when you complete certain objectives, as in most horror games, that's usually when the enemies come out, and that is the case in Whispering Willows as well. So when you go through the maze, you're collecting flowers to give to Darby O'Halloran down there because he basically needs to find a way to repent for killing the little girl, which is one of the story elements you find. She was a little native girl and Darby killed her, just kind of errantly on the orders of his boss. And when going through the maze, you have to pick up the flowers, and once you pick up all the flowers, the hedges start attacking. Yeah, so they explain it as basically dark spirits possessing the place, and because of all the hardship that went down here, people are dying en masse, and stuff sucks for everyone, but the hedge monsters basically just come out and swipe at you, and their patterns are really easy to predict. In fact, you don't even really have to wait for them to come out and swipe. You can just move. You can just run, and they won't be able to hit you. So they're kind of disappointing in that regard, and it kind of makes them seem a little bit superfluous as to why they're there. Now, what to do about here? Well, let's go back to the diary because I got an entry and I should probably look at this. So, I met this lady. I think she might be French. Her accent is hard. She's very upset over it. I think she's being a little overdramatic. Yes. Luckily the character does kind of, in those little diaries that she writes, she does actually speak like a little girl might. She has a very childish view of the world, even though the character looks like 15-ish. The character is kind of oddly drawn to be a little girl, quote-unquote, but I don't know, I guess if you squint your eyes and kind of backed away a little bit, you could see her as 11, maybe. So the enemies, not really a threat. In fact, there was one section, I actually got an achievement for completing this, where there was a little kind of louse scorpion creature thing on the ground. Very creepy little thing. And I thought I was going to have to, like, stealth by it somehow, like maybe do some kind of maneuver that I hadn't learned yet, or go into ghost form and fly over it, or distract it, or something to that regard, but I didn't have to do anything of the sort. I basically just walked past it and nothing happened. So, I don't know if I'm just a boss, or something happened there that shouldn't have. I'm going to assume it's probably a bug, maybe something to do with the press copy that I got, but I don't know. I would be on the lookout for it at release, when this game does release, which is July 9th. So if you're having that problem, maybe contact the developers. Hopefully they'll get this video in time and they might be able to look over it if it is still a bug. I'm hoping it's not, because they are very close to release. If you're wondering why I'm kind of wandering around at the moment, it's to do with the game not being very intuitive again. In terms of how it instructs you to get around. I don't really know where I'm going. I have the knife, and I probably need to find this girl's letter, because usually when you help out an NPC, they will then either unlock something or give you some kind of vital piece of information about where to go next. But considering I don't... Oh, I know where to go. Okay. And this is another thing. You do have kind of eureka moments like I just did. So, and I think I'm right on this. There are several locations that have vines. There is a... what is it? I think it's a conservatory that has vines kind of blocking the door. And I just got a knife, so I think I can take this knife and go cut the vines. That's what I'm thinking. So... yeah, this is one of those examples where you just have a eureka moment. You're kind of just like, ah, that's what the game wants me to do. And this is what I'm thinking anyway. And this might be another moment where I'm randomly right and I probably shouldn't be, but again, the game kind of makes sense in the way that it instructs you to go to certain places. Like in this case, I'm having to go cut vines with a knife. I hope this will work. Usually I would think you would want like hedge trimmers for that or something, but you know, maybe. And considering this area that I just entered pretty much just leads me out to the front door of the mansion anyway, I think this is where it wants me to go. So, to get back to the conservatory, we're going to need to walk off to the right here. Now, if you don't like walking in your games, it kind of gets to be a problem. The game doesn't have any run features, so it kind of feels like Dear Esther, where you basically have to hold down the walking key. It could be seen as a walking simulator in some regards, because a lot of what you're going to be doing throughout most of the game is just walking from location to location. I think that's where the majority of all my gameplay's gone, so that's a little bit of a problem. Well, I'm right. So, yeah, one of those eureka moments where you just get an item and you kind of have to assume based on where you've been before where you got to use it, because the game's not going to tell you. But I think the game introduces enough of its locations and the elements that you should be able to figure out where you got to go before you actually get the item to figure out that you need to get into that location. So usually you'll probably be in a pretty good position. Now, I noticed that this object has to be possessed because it kind of looked a little bit different. Another mechanic is you'll be possessing objects, as shown before, to cause certain environmental reactions, like that. I don't know why I did that. Oh, and I got a key out of it. So you'll possess little objects and kind of just move them, manipulate them around certain ways to achieve certain ends. Alright, there's a spirit in here. I was really hoping to show you some enemies, but I'm not coming into any. Allen Wood. And again, with the very, very odd and eerie, but very good art direction on these things. I think it's more the character modeling that really impresses me more than anything else, but it's also just the coloration of the ghosts, I think. And they're very expressive. Also, I didn't read a word of that because I was talking. Let's go back through that again. It's hard to commentate and read. Family flower shop. Oh, okay. Nothing useful. So, we got a key. Let's look at that key. Small key. Well, I don't really know where there's a locked location. Oh. Never mind. I was gonna say, I don't know where there's a locked door where I could use that key. But, I suppose that's not really a problem. Alright, so I got some notes. Now, let's see if there's any enemies. No. Well, usually in environments like these. This is another interesting feature I find. You can tell when something bad's about to happen, because the character will kind of hunch over like she's afraid. That indicates that usually something bad is about. And then she'll just go into full-on sprints when there's something you actually have to escape from. So if you want to run, you gotta wait until something's trying to kill you, basically. Kinda sucks. But, I think it's a nice indication of knowing where the enemies are, and it's a very, very odd little attention to detail kind of thing. It's very nuanced, but I think it's actually a really nice feature. And again, it kind of just ties into how very... what's a good word for it? I kind of went back here. I don't think I needed to... Oh, yes I do. I need to go back and talk to the girl. The poor woman who has lost her love letter. I think it just ties into the awesome art direction. The art direction makes this game. If you want any sort of bad features about the game, aside from what I've already listed with having to walk everywhere and the kind of lack of enemies, the puzzles are kind of lame, and I found myself kind of disintrigued with some of the stuff that's been going on. Like, the story of this mansion is kind of what you've already heard before in any sort of US history class. It's, you know, the natives were pushed off their lands by some greedy white guy, and there's clear evidence that he killed a lot of them, and the site is kind of haunted as a result of that. It's nothing really unique, but I think it's still a little bit compelling because you get to see all these ghost characters. The ghost characters kind of make it, I think. If these guys weren't here, there wouldn't be much incentive to move around. Take this ring. Oh, and then you get little bits of intrigue like this, which implies that she was probably the owner of the mansion's mistress, as indicated by that little bit of statement. So there is a little bit of story with the ghosts, and as I said before, need to read the symbol. Fleur left with me. Oh, I need to read this. Okay, so this has a little secret message. Alright, go to the wine cellar, which is just downstairs. So, now that we have that. And usually Elena will say a little thing, or she'll write a new diary entry every time she basically absolves a spirit, helps them move on. And it kind of feels pretty nice, because you feel like you help these people, you really feel like you help these people move on from life and finally move on to the afterlife, and it has a little bit of a satisfying feeling to it. The ghosts don't really have a whole lot of characterization to them, but what you do get out of them is pretty nice. Oh, Fleur, who'd have known that she... Yep. See anyone so happy over something so simple? And then there are moments like this where Elena writes notes which really don't seem like she's a kid, but... Alright. And then there's kind of there are some kind of overhanging messages to the game. Probably one of the biggest is the heavy-handed sort of thing between the Native Americans and the whites, and kind of respecting the heritage of the Native Americans that suffered at the hands of the whites. It's kind of a... It doesn't beat you over the head with it, but it is reiterated in a lot of parts throughout the mansion. And then you have and then you kind of have this ongoing thing between what is good and what is evil, and is Wortham really evil? And because the implication is he's done so much good for the town, can he really be evil even though he killed all these people? And it's constant back and forth in that regard. It makes you think a little bit, which is kind of nice. Now, the diary... I don't really know where to go from here. Wilting flowers. Well, I'm not really sure where I need to go with this. But I suppose that's probably good enough. I've shown you about the core mechanics of the game, and I've talked enough about this at length, so... This has been Whispering Willows, and if you guys think you might want to pick it up on Steam, it's going to be about $15, releasing on July 9th. Again, developed and published by DawnLight Interactive, and I do wish them good going forward. The game is actually pretty interesting. I think they could do a little bit more with mechanics for future games, but definitely keep the people that they've hired on for art direction. I think they could go pretty far with it. My name's been Omega. See you guys next time.